elephants and donkeys. Although I will say, over this past year, I've dealt with more than my fair share of donkeys on both sides of the aisle. And I will say it is not about censorship, despite what you might have read about some of us in the Tennessean. We are not talking about recreational reading. We are talking about curriculum whose one and only purpose is to transmit knowledge, and much of the knowledge in those books is untrue, and they know it, okay? And as to the Common Core exemplars, the list of what children should be reading. There was one that turned up, well, there's Dreaming in Cuban, A Time for Butterflies, The Bluest Eye. One showed up in a 5th grade, it's not on the exemplar list, but that showed up in a 5th grade reading room in Williamson County today, Freedom Elementary, I think, and it's not on the exemplars list. It would not be appropriate for me to even say the title of the book in this room. Okay? I could not say the title without swearing. And it was on, I will tell you, it was first published as a serial by Playboy. 5th graders, okay?
By Ronald Dahl.
Yes. Anyway, it's also not about censorship, because so long as these books continue to sell, they're going to be on a shelf at Barnes & Noble, or you can get them at Amazon or wherever else. The issue isn't censorship, the issue is the mandates. Why does our government feel it has the right to mandate that we use our tax dollars to have our children forced to learn things that violate our values, our beliefs, with our money, and that deny our children any right to privacy or innocence from the earliest ages? Also, not in favor of burning books, again, despite what you might have heard in different newspapers, because where people start out burning books, history shows us that they tend to end up burning people. So we're opposed to that. But we also need to remember that great historian once said that the ovens of Auschwitz were not formed in the war rooms of Berlin, rather the lecture halls of Munich. And there's subtle things that take place over time that teach children it is okay to treat these people this way and these people that way. And I'm sorry, we need to stand up and have our children understand that that is not of God, and we will have no part of it. And we refuse to be a part. And I think it's time we realize we could be a whole lot closer to Berlin 1938 than any of us realizes. From what?
So they didn't realize it.
Nope. And I'm sorry, the Soviet Union fell in a day and nobody saw it coming. But from the Spartans to the Khmer Rouge, any time a government has ever attempted to centralize control over education or control over our children, very, very, very bad things have happened. People go, it's America, we've got checks and balances. Well, let's look at this. Let's look at it. Well, here we go. So, and I want you to understand, this is not my list, okay? This is not my list, but here's a list of what has happened. Laws were passed to promote a teachers' union, and that union again eventually grew so powerful that it was difficult to work in a classroom without somehow being associated with the union. But eventually the union gained so much power that the will of those in the classroom actually teaching tended to come behind the will of government mandates. Teachers were weeded out if they were not able to go along with the program. That the teachers who wanted to keep their jobs were sort of forced into quiet acquiescence, and older teachers were replaced with younger teachers who were bright and energetic and cheaper, and most importantly, compliant.
Yeah. And didn't know federal laws that they were being broken.
Mm-hmm. Teachers who were enthusiastic promoters and supporters of new policies got promoted, and they got fun new titles like master teachers. Curriculum was rewritten to provide state-approved education. There was an anti-intellectualism that began to creep into the schools, where the focus moved from truth and facts and knowledge to physical health and lifestyle choices, diet, indoctrination, propaganda, and a new morality or ethics that was completely absent from theology. It was an education of the will rather than a developing of the mind, okay? What else? Committees with all sorts of fun names and acronyms started to spring up here and there, and to establish a government ideological training. Ed leaders and those master teachers began showing up in groups to visit schools to be sure that their rooms and their teachers were compliant with the new policies. Education leaders operated through propaganda and intimidation. What started as seminars going, hey gang, this is going to be great, quickly turned into, you're a government employee, and if you want to keep your job, this is what you need to do.
Exactly.
Teachers were encouraged to promote specific political leaders themselves and idealize that individual in their curriculum. True history was distorted, and right and wrong were based on the government-approved curriculum. Like the principal told my husband and I, well, of course we know it's wrong, but it's on the test at the end of the year, so it's what we have to teach the kids. Students taught to spy on teachers and parents. Whether or not you're aware of it, children across Middle Tennessee have already been given surveys. One of them, and of course they remove the regular teacher from the classroom, send in other teachers, and they'll ask them questions like, does your teacher push you? Does your teacher want you to go in college? Keep in mind, in many schools, the kids are being shown videos telling them that the problem is too many kids are going to college and the state needs more laborers. And those videos are even popping up in Williamson County.
Yeah.
Really. And the kids are asked things like, how many books are in the room where you sleep at night? How many other children stay in the place where you stay? Not only is that, well, not only do they know it's illegal, it continues to happen. That in the state of Tennessee, there's the Pupil Protection Rights Act, which forbids questioning a child in any way that could potentially put anyone with whom they have a close familial relationship in negative light. And you may not ask them about their attitudes or actions regarding personal belief. It's happening all over the state. That educators and older generations began to become concerned that the youth were growing increasingly arrogant and disrespectful, understanding their ability to report adults, and knowing that teachers could do little to nothing about any of their actions. Then the idea arose that children belong to the state. Actually, the Latin for it is parens patriam. The fatherland is the parent. And in fact, the person who put this list together actually said, when an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. And what are you? You will pass on. Your descendants, however, stand already now in our new camp. And in a short time, they will know nothing but this new community that we have created. Do you know the most disturbing thing about this list? This is not Common Core. This is Adolf Hitler, 1930s. And I challenge anyone to show me anything on this list that doesn't apply equally to what is happening in our schools today. And in fact, most of our children are being moved over into other camps without us even having a clue that they don't even know the America that we grew up in. We need to be clear. Common Core is the name they have chosen for the national federal government's seizure of education. And in fact, we've got a video that we'll send to some of you. We didn't have time to get it, but of Arnie Duncan and his people, even saying, well, of course,
Do they know Arlington?
oh, he heads the U.S. Department of Education, saying, well, of course, it's the president's idea, but how would that go over in red states if we let the governors know that this was really from him? It is to education, Obamacare or Commie Core, either one fits. It is to education what Obamacare is to healthcare. The only difference is no one was even given a chance to vote on it. Now, at the Capitol, do you know what they literally call the day that the Race to the Top funds were given out? It's not Race to the Top up there. They jokingly call it Race to the Trough, because it wasn't going to come in Tennessee. But what they did, they had somebody go to the floor and start reading how much money your district and your district and your district standed to lose if you didn't vote for this. And all of a sudden, everybody needed to get their money. And do you know what they did with our money? Our government spent $700,000 of those Race to the Top funds to send our top educators to China to study the Chinese education methods. Well, here's the reality of that. And I'm sure with the big deal with the test scores today. Let's talk about how much we want our children to be like China, because whether or not we're willing to admit it, the Chinese are desperately trying to be like us. In China, children are out of bed before 5:30 in the morning. They have finished their first class by 7:30, and most of them will be done with their school day 10:30 in the evening. They will have a 2-hour break for dinner and a 1-hour break for lunch. They have the highest academic suicide rate in the world. They have one test that determines their future, that determines what they will even be allowed to do. That's our goal? Because we also need to address the fact.
It's the same in South Korea as well.
Well, and the reality is, I'm going to kind of skip around my notes a little bit here, but the reality is, for all that they're holding these up, all they show is that they're willing to beat their children down to do really, really well on one test that's really not an accurate measure of actual knowledge. Do you know who, if you look at it overall and long-term outcomes, because in both South Korea and China, or at least most of the Asian states, I think South Korea, but it's interesting because your score on the test has almost nothing to do with your long-term success in life. But you get to be a celebrity temporarily if you do really well on the test. The country with the absolute best education overall, based on average pay, everything else when they get out of school, Finland. To the point that they're calling it the Finland miracle. And here's what Finland has done, because they were in the toilet educationally. They don't look at what America's doing now, they look at what America was doing 100 years ago. They have no homework. No children go to school before the age of 7 because you are depriving them of the right to be a child, and testing children before 7 is far too stressful. There are very few exams. There is almost no standardized testing. There is no centralization at all. The schools are completely locally controlled entities. But what do they have? They take the money that the rest of the world spends on the lousy standardized tests and they shrink those class sizes down. They have little tiny classes, I say little, 15, 20 kids, that's it. The other thing they do, they expect, unlike the American school boards of late, they expect a high level of parental involvement. That you are expected to walk into that classroom at any point during the year just to check on what your child is up to. You're expected to know what they're studying, and that is what makes the difference. But nobody wants to talk about that. And truthfully, and I need to skip forward here, and I don't want to talk too long because we want to leave plenty of time for questions. Because there's just a whole lot of corruption in the system. And by the way, have you guys, do you know about the grit and tenacity paper?
No.
No.
She has it, she can look at it, you can look at it afterwards, but the spookiest things about what are going on in education today, we're not talking stuff from tinfoil hat websites, we're talking about things in Department of Ed publications. On page 32, they tried to bore you to death with the first 31 pages, but if you can grunt through, or just go to page 32, it talks about monitoring children through computers. On page, what is it, 44, 46, something like that. It's in the, that they show pictures of technologies that will gauge your child's reaction to different teachers, to controversial subjects, that they have pressure mics, they have posture monitors in the chair, that they have wireless skin conductors that will measure heart rate and sweat. Now here's the thing, just to be clear. I'm not saying your kid's going to school and being plugged in, although if they did, they'd never tell you. And you're not allowed to know. But the paper itself says these technologies are not cost feasible yet. Yet.
Now, where is this found at?
It's grit, tenacity, and perseverance, and she has copies.
It's a Department of Education.
Yeah,
paper.
it's Department of Education.
It's about 120 pages of.
But the issue isn't that they're talking about this or going, here's what we could do. The issue is that the people driving education today think that this is okay. They think that it doesn't even occur to them that our children and our families are not commodities to be mined. And in fact, a week or two ago, they started putting out things, same education experts, about how well we could fund the schools if we started selling the data that we get from data mining your children. By the way, another one to look up, Tennessee Race to the Top 360. And it talks about the federal database that the government is building on our children. And I'm sorry, if you thought the NSA was creepy,
Yeah.
and this is their own publication.
Yeah.
And ask Jack Johnson, he's a state senator, he'll tell you, yes, absolutely, it does exist and it's a problem. But what they do, it talks about how they're going to establish a 360-degree view of your child. P20, prenatal through 20, and actually on into the workforce.
Yes,
That they, I mean, when you register, I've heard stories from women who went to register children for pre-K and were asked how much weight they gained, at what age they became sexually active, at what, how much they were sick during their pregnancy. It's exactly none of the government's business.
Right.
But, and I don't want to go on too long, but
I got a question.
yes,
How did we get here?
how do we get here? Okay. Do you know why, truthfully? And it's my way of thinking why kids get out of college and leave the church and never go back. Because for years, we have driven up to a building, dropped our kids off at the front door and said, here is the place where you collect knowledge, go have fun. And then we pick them up when they're 18. And we don't, because we as a culture have been too compliant and too materialistic. Because class moms are a thing of the past, partly because some moms just got too busy, mostly because we're not welcome there anymore. But we have complied and we have said, oh, I'm not allowed to do that anymore. I've got a passport that will get me into China. I've got a security background check that allows me to roam the halls of the prison downtown in Nashville that will not get me into my child's
I
classroom.
understand.
You know, they literally, and Lana I think can vouch for this, I think you were there, I have been threatened with arrest for daring to ask a question at a school board meeting. No one was rude, no one raised their voice, no one, and actually the guy from Weekly Reader, believe it or not, he had heard about it at the book convention, and he said, do you know the mistake that you made? And this was before the guy in New England ever got arrested. He said, the mistake that you made was that you left the floor because I asked the question, I allowed an extra 30 seconds or so, and just stood there in silence and went, so nobody's going to answer it. Raise your hand, simple yes or no. No, they refused. Go to your school board meeting, ask them a question, see what they'll do, and then read what the Tennessee Constitution says about that kind of thing, because they are to answer to the people. But I stood there for 30 seconds and it got very uncomfortable because it was a very, very loud silence. And for that, but the guy from Weekly Reader said, and this goes back to your question, the mistake that you made is you complied and you left the floor when your time was up and you didn't stand there and insist that they answer your question. And they probably would carry you away in handcuffs, but if you've got 5 or 10 other parents who are willing to go with you, because and actually literally what he said is, it's time to go Rosa Parks on them. Because he said, when you've got a bunch of sweet moms or grandmas and grandpas asking questions about their kids' education, and they're arrested for asking the question, then all of a sudden it throws it in the face of the world, and we just haven't been paying attention. And that's it. And you know what? We, as a people, need to repent for that. Let me give you one more. The other reason it got here is the obscene level of corruption. And I'll do this and then we'll do questions. Okay. Now, let's imagine that there is one textbook company that quickly and quietly begins buying up all of the others. And it has them keep the original imprints to create an illusion of competition where none exists. Imagine if there was a bond of $1,000 per book, per child, per class, placed for the privilege of being allowed to participate in the bidding process. Pay to play, okay? That's what you've got to be able to come to the table with. Well, you pretty quickly get into the millions of dollars, and you pretty quickly have priced out the mom and pop publishers, and you're left with multinational corporation. Imagine if the same company selling the textbooks got exclusive contracts to sell the government the tests. And not only are parents not permitted to see the major tests anymore, the teachers themselves are not allowed to see the tests that come into the classroom. And if they accidentally do, not only do they lose their job, they lose their license. I know of a state representative who, when she got word that came across her desk about some of the questions on some of the surveys and tests being asked to our students, that she sent a letter through her people saying, tell them I want to see this. And do you know the response that they got, despite the millions of dollars we hand them every year? The only response she was able to get from them was, the vendor doesn't give you permission to see it. The vendor.
Who is this vendor?
Pearson Publishing.
Pearson.
Wait, it gets better. It gets a whole lot better. Imagine if the same company not only sold the books and the tests, but was now over GED and teacher certification and special needs testing and TCAP and data collection. And the list goes on and on and on. And imagine that this company was not even based in the United States. Imagine that they counted among their major investors the Libyan Investment Authority, who bought 20 million shares in a single purchase. Could this be why, as the black Al-Qaeda flag flew over our consulate in Benghazi, my kids' textbook said Libya is not considered a state sponsor of terror? And by the way, the book has been rewritten since Benghazi, and they had time to put in all sorts of other stuff. And there was no mention to the attacks in Benghazi. The beer summit made it. The beer summit made it, Benghazi did not make it, and the book still says that Libya is not a sponsor of terror. In fact, if you believe the textbook, that you would believe that fundamentalists, that it says the 9/11 attacks and all of these other attacks were a result of religious fundamentalism. And by the way, fundamentalism sprang out of the American Evangelical Protestant Church. Sounds crazy, right? Let's take it even crazier, okay? Because we haven't even gotten to the good stuff yet. Now imagine if the same attorney that represented that publisher also represented every superintendent in the state of Tennessee and represented 60 of the school districts, so that when parents went to them and said, hey, we've got a problem with this product, that the response we would consistently get is, well, legal says there's no problem, really, because legal is the vendor. And imagine
Name?
Chuck Cagle. And by the way, they will, you can go,
Not Hagel, but Cable.
Cagle, C-A-G-L-E.
Yeah.
And we had an issue where we called out the school board and said, hey, do you know this? And some of our people got pretty stern letters of rebuke saying, you don't know what you're talking about, these are our attorneys. And it's like, no, we've got a public records release proving that he actually is on staff. And the fact that the possible conflict was not disclosed to all individuals raises it not just from an ethical problem, which it clearly is, but to a legal, potentially a criminal problem. And let's face it, if we were talking roads and potholes, someone would be talking about jail by now. But it gets even better. Imagine if this guy's wife was an executive for that publisher. Imagine that the attorney paid to represent our interests, the interest of our school boards, the interest of the superintendents. Imagine if he was also a paid lobbyist for the publisher up at the Capitol. That's what we're dealing with in
Busy
Tennessee.
man.
What?
Says a busy man.
He
Yeah.
is a busy man.
Well, and he's a very, very, very wealthy man on our dime.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm sorry. Pearson Publishing. Well, let me tell you something else, and then I'll wrap it up because I know we've got to get to questions. Part of the issue is that I've got examples of errors that were in Pearson Publishing's books in the 90s. And in the 90s, when they got called out on it, not by conservative white soccer moms who were just upset that their kids aren't as brilliant as they thought they were. And I actually, I don't know if any of you saw that. It gave me a lot of joy because I actually responded to Arnie. And I said, by the way, my 15-year-old is in pre-calc and physics, so yes, he is brilliant enough to know that this sucks. So anyway, anyway, that gave me great joy in a very shallow kind of way. And, okay, the other thing is, imagine that the price of these tests has gone from teachers writing it and copying it themselves to $14 to $40. And by the way, no parent, no teacher is ever allowed to see it. And the teacher's job rides on the score that that kid gets on a test that she's never permitted to see. That's how sick it is. But these major errors go back decades, and they were pointed out by people like 60 Minutes in 2020 and Hugh Downs and ABC News. And they swore that they would have it resolved within 9 months, which is laughable. The idea that they could prove 45,000 books in 9 months is just absurd. But everybody bought into it and backed off. Well, we're coming up on 30 years later. And the same problems exist, only they're worse. And they're more anti-Semitic, they're more anti-Christian, they're more untrue. And by the way, thanks to the new standards in the state of Tennessee, American history, high school American history now begins with the Industrial Revolution. So we are set up. There is no Christian heritage to this nation. There are no framing documents. There are no founding fathers. Your kids will not hear about Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and George Washington and Betsy Ross and all the rest of them. They are going to hear. They will read the speeches from Castro and Kalo and Chavez and Che and Stalin. And in fact, there's one list in one of the textbooks that shows great revolutionary leaders. And it is Stalin and Lenin and Kemal and who else am I missing?
Mao.
Mao. killed 100 million of his own people in peacetime.
American history,
Well, this is the world history, I'm sorry, so I gotta be clear here. Great Rep, and I thought, at first I thought, oh, well maybe they're showing what you're not supposed to be, except wedged right in the middle of them was Gandhi. Wedged right in the middle of them. And, like Kemal, hunted down 1.5 million people, father of the Armenian Holocaust, and their great sin was being Christian. You've got people who, civics has been replaced with comparative governance. And while they tell you about the atrocities committed by the United States, bold letters, peace and prosperity are used to describe life in Iran. Islamic